profile?
Well, I love writing profiles because one of the things I love most about my job as a nonfiction writer is to interview someone and try to get to the heart of why they chose to live their lives the way they did. I use the word chose because I tend to write about people who did choose a certain kind of life, who invented or brought about a certain kind of life that they thought of beforehand. Obviously, many people are just buffeted about by circumstance and end up doing something they hadn't really intended in the first place. But I'm fascinated by people who are very calculated and thoughtful about the way they live their lives. And I love getting to the heart of that with one person to find out really two questions that I usually want to answer. One is, why are they so good at what they do? And the other is, what caused them to fall in love with a certain set of ideas? Why did they find themselves drawn to this path and not others? And that's what I love. And I usually, when I'm writing a profile, take myself out of it because I want the reader, insofar as it's possible, to have that same experience of encountering a person directly and intimately and feeling that I'm not in the way and feeling that they can really get inside that person's head and feel how it is that person came to do what they do. Because this is one of the wonderful things about interviewing someone for a profile is that often you'll be asking people questions that they haven't thought about in 20 or 30 or 40 years. Why did I end up doing this and not that? And what would my life have been like if I'd gone the other way? And that's what I'm trying to get at. But there are many ways to write profiles, and someone who does something very different, for instance, is Janet Malcolm, who is an absolute master, not just of the profile, but of many kinds of writing. And anyone who knows her work will realize that she gets extraordinary revelations out of the relationship between herself and her subject, out of the journalistic encounter, out of the interview itself. And she couldn't do that without putting herself squarely in the middle of the pieces she writes. And I think those are extraordinary. And so there's no one way to write a profile, but I happen to want to take myself out in order that the reader can feel as intimate with the subject as possible. I often choose not to use quotations for the same reason that I keep myself out of the profiles, which is that you would think that quotations would be the most intimate access, would comprise the most intimate access to another person possible, because it's what comes directly out of their mouths. But in fact, if you encounter a quotation in writing, it's a somewhat distancing effect, because you become very aware that this person is separate from me. They are speaking, their speech is circumscribed by these quotation marks. I'm really not very intimate with them. I'm observing them rather than feeling what it's like to be them. And so if you remove the quotations and instead describe a person's thought process as they have described it to you, it's again a much more intimate way of encountering somebody. Now, mind you, sometimes I do use quotations for a different reason. So, for instance, in one chapter of my book, I'm writing about Sue and Hector Badeau, who are a couple who live in Philadelphia who adopted 20 kids, in addition to the 2 biological kids they also had. And so we're talking about 24 people in a household. Of course, there weren't always 24 people in the household at once, but a very, very large family. And in that, I felt that one of the most important things to get across was just how many people there are and how different they are from each other. And so I wanted the reader to feel somewhat buffeted by different voices bursting in and interrupting. And of course they couldn't literally interrupt each other, but that I wanted to communicate that sense of a crowded space filled with very different sorts of people. And so then I did use quotations to create that sense, because intimacy, a sort of quiet intimacy, was not, I thought, the most important thing to get across about this family.